Um, it's such an honor to be here today to deliver this lecture. I am really, really excited about being here. Unfortunately, due to the recent situation, we don't have people to engage with directly, but I'm happy that we have the media. Professor Thomas McMurray is helping us by recording this. So thank you so much, sir. Also, thanks for the opportunity to come deliver this lecture here. It's my first time in Oshawa, going through this very remarkable school and seeing some of the history behind it. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Okechukwu Effoduh. You can call me Oke, you can call me Jake, you can call me Effoduh. I'm a PhD student at the Oxford Hall Law School, York University, and I'm doing my research on the impact of artificial intelligence on human rights. So this topic is something that catches my interest, something that I'm very, very, very much passionate about. We live in the age of the fourth industrial revolution, characterized by new and emerging technologies like biotech, nanotechnology, 3D printing, robotics, and of course, artificial intelligence. And so we know very much that AI is set to transform a lot of sectors. It has really made huge changes in healthcare, by providing healthcare delivery, by personalizing school curriculums, with drones and all kinds of new tech devices. Human rights seems to be advanced. But of course, AI also raises a lot of issues. We see concerns about algorithmic bias, systems whereby identity has been erased by AI, or people get discriminated by algorithms when they try to seek for job interviews and whatnot. So these are some of the issues that are of human rights concern to us. But today's objective is to look at what human rights are, what artificial intelligence is, what is the implication of AI on human rights, and how does it affect the human rights protection within Africa, because it's very, very, very different. What I'm seeking to achieve is not just a lecture, but a conversation whereby people can actually ask questions and I can ask as well, so we learn from each other, because things like AI and human rights are very broad. And so one person is not like a mobilizer of knowledge of this. So you need to find ways to engage. And for AI being a new technology, there's a lot that could come through it. So this is the outline for today's conversation. And to start with the first part, what are human rights? So this is a Canadian human rights law class. I don't need to say much more about what human rights are. We have the Canadian Human Rights Act. We have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that establish some of the rights that you are entitled to. But one way to understand human rights could be through concepts. Concepts like ability, acceptance, affirmation, dignity, diversity, helps us understand what the construct of human rights entail. For example, when we talk about dignity, it refers to the intrinsic self-worth of a human being, which means that no human being can be bought or sold because we're very invaluable. And even though we've heard things like that in the past, in today's day and age, human rights ensures that nobody could be traded off or used as a product or a material. When we talk about equality, it's about equal rights for everyone. If a boy can get into a classroom, a girl should be able to do that. If people can get married, other people should be able to have access to that marriage as well, irrespective of their sexual orientation. And when we talk about equity, you hear about equity in terms of understanding that human beings are different. So therefore, a person who's visually impaired would need a lot more resources to be in this class. Perhaps not needing just books and a laptop, but a braille. So these are just concepts. And I'm sure through your course, you've heard intersectionality, solidarity, well-being, and whatnot. But in international human rights law, this construct is very, very important, because irrespective of where you're from, whether you're Canadian or otherwise, these rights still apply. So these rights are universal, they are fundamental because you need them to survive. They're interrelated. For example, your right to healthcare is tied to your right to life, and your right to housing is tied to your right to healthcare. They're also interdependent and they're inalienable. So whether or not you're a criminal or you have committed an offense, some of these rights are still very much valuable to you. You have a right not to be tortured and whatnot. But within international human rights law, we have what we call the International Bill of Rights, like the Bible or the Quran, the holy book of human rights law. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 was a declaration that a Canadian was actually very much part of in drafting. There was a lawyer, John Humphrey, at the time, who played a significant role in drafting that document. And these are one of the most signed to international treaties or covenants by the entire world. So the UDHR 1948, the ICCPR, and the ICSCR are the three documents that encode international human rights law. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually gets some of its wordings from the International Bill of Rights. And then finally on human rights, this guy called Karel Vasak, I think in 1979, said that to understand human rights, we should categorize them in generations. So the first generation of rights are what we call liberty rights. They are civil and political rights, and they are things like your right to assembly, freedom of movement, your right to life, your right to vote. That these rights are negative in the sense of that they are asking the government not to take this away from you. Don't touch my freedom of movement, don't touch my freedom of speech, don't touch my freedom to associate. So they are first generation liberty rights. The second generation rights are economic, social, and cultural rights. And these are positive rights. These are hands-on. You're asking the government, my right to healthcare, how can I get that? Give me my right to education, give me my social security, right to work and whatnot. And these are equality rights. And of course, the third generation rights are what we call fraternity rights. These are rights that have to do with solidarity of everyone. For example, in advancing climate change adaptation and mitigation, we need everyone in every country to participate. So this is like collective rights. Again, I'm just establishing this to understand the framework for human rights, not only within Canada, but internationally as well. And it's important to understand this because as a technologist or a computer scientist, you need to keep asking yourself, in what ways does the new technology affect human rights? What kinds of rights would it affect? Would it affect rights here in Canada or beyond? You need to understand how these conversations happen. So the next part of this lecture will be about AI. What exactly is artificial intelligence? Now, the A, which is artificial, is easy to pretty much understand, but the intelligence has raised a lot of questions. Because artificial could be anything that is man-made, is artificial. But intelligence in itself is something that has raised a lot of controversies in terms of defining it. But we can go back to computer science, which is where the term came from. In 1956, John McCarthy says AI is an engineering of making intelligent machines. So he came up with this term in 1956. And after then, hundreds of scholars have tried to define what AI means. But a simple test that we used to define AI came from Alan Turing, who is the father of computer science and mathematics. And the Turing test is that when you're communicating when you can't tell if you're communicating with a human being or a computer, when it's not clear with whom you're engaging with, then that's AI. So if you pick up a phone and you can't tell if customer service is a human being or an algorithm, then that is AI. That is what the Turing test implies. But in my research around the definitions of AI in computer science, most people accrue it to be anything that could think humanly, think rationally, act humanly or act rationally, or a combination of them constitutes AI. So broadly speaking, any machine or program that is capable of recreating one or more elements of human intelligence will be considered AI. But in international law, it's very different. We lawyers tend to be very critical about certain things. So there is no widely accepted definition of AI in law, and this is because in law, the term intelligence is pretty much accrued to human beings and human beings only. It's difficult for law to accrue intelligence to something that is not human. But secondly, AI has been queried within legal literature because what seems to be AI shifts very often. Maybe 50 years ago, a calculator would be considered AI, but today, we can't really say a calculator is AI. So what AI is the goalpost tends to move very rapidly. But one thing that is in agreement within international law is that the basic ingredient for understanding AI is algorithms. Algorithms are like a set of instructions for a computer system to operate, to solve a particular problem or otherwise. The first accepted definition we got, which is 2 years ago, was from the UN Secretary General, where he said that AI today is the language of the culture of companies and governments. And international lawyers were like, well, what do you mean the culture, the language of companies and government? But he makes a very valid representation of what AI is today. You hardly find a Fortune 500 company or a government that does not engage with AI in one way or the other. And in thinking about AI, it's instead of people thinking of some futuristic technology, every single day, most of us get to engage with AI. Maybe from our email spam folder, or from your phone, Apple Siri, or Amazon's Alexa, or when you go using Uber or Lyft, or if you have a Roomba in your house, you're definitely engaging with AI. When you try to access your credit card processing or a video game, these are various ways that we engage with AI every single day. Before concluding on this part, I think it's important to establish some basic concepts within AI. The broader construct, like the big circle, which is AI, encompasses a lot, but within AI, we have a subset known as machine learning. So machine learning is a system whereby the AI or the algorithm gets to get smarter by the use of historical data to get better and smarter all by itself, right? So this is an AI that is increasing in terms of intelligence, in terms of its knowledge, using the data that it's available to it. But within machine learning, we have a smaller subset which is called deep learning. And deep learning has been modeled around the neurological system of a human being. So think about deep learning, especially in healthcare sectors. Deep learning has been used to sort of evaluate a human body to tell if there are any inconsistencies with the body. So it looks at both the brain, the body, the bone structure, the blood, every part of the human body. So it's deep because it's interconnected and very complex to solve problems within that space. So of course, within AI, you hear things like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotics, big data, dark data, and whatnot. It would have been interesting to find out if anyone in the class doesn't understand any of these terms, so we can actually expatiate, or I could give some examples. And of course, people have said that beyond what we have today, that there's a possibility for AI to become super intelligent, meaning that an AI can create its own AI, and that AI becomes so intelligent that it knows everything and can do everything way much more than a human being can. Professor Nick Bostrom at Oxford has theorized this level of intelligence, but yeah, we don't need to go into that. So, having established what human rights are, and having attempted a coverage of what artificial intelligence is, the next part is to find out what is the implication of AI on human rights generally. What are some of the ways that this new technology seems to hinder or promote human rights? And so for this part, what I would do is, I know you're very much abreast with the distinction between civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. So I would try to show you how AI has advanced civil and political rights, or limited them, and then I'll show you how it's been able to advance economic, social, and cultural rights, and limited them as well. So this is going to be in two parts. So for the first part, what are the pros? What are the ways by which AI has promoted civil and political rights? One is through self-driving cars. So according to Victoria Transport Policy Institute, a model, Waymo, of autonomous vehicles will save 600,000 lives between 2020 and 2035, reducing road fatalities by 15%. So AI promises to reduce the amount of road accidents that regular cars will cause, thereby promoting the right to life. Another one is not just radar, but there are a couple of AI systems that help press companies disseminate information better. There are AI algorithms that would break down news articles to your own level of knowledge. So it would break down the structure of the article and piece out information that is relevant to you, thereby promoting your access to press and information. Also, in terms of personal security, there have been instances where Alexa had been able to call 911 on hearing altercation between people in a room, and the police showed up and the woman's life was saved. And so there are other AI systems that would predict suicide, theft, thereby promoting personal security and the right to life. So this is not to say that AI does not advance human rights. It does. It promotes civil and political rights in various ways, but it also limits or hinders some aspects of civil and political rights. There are tons of algorithms that are very discriminatory based on the way that they've been encoded. So even Google's photo app in 2015 applied automatic labels to pictures but it classified the images of Africans as gorillas. And so that, therefore, you can imagine a company as big as Google with algorithms that classify some human beings as gorillas, that just tells you tons of other algorithms will be doing the same, thereby limiting or advancing discrimination. So a lot of people who are of color or women have shown to be treated discriminatorily by algorithms where they try to apply for a job or try to seek some form of benefit. Same thing with the right to vote. Not many people understand that AI has psychologically manipulated them. But if you look at a particular series called, it's not a series, it's a documentary called The Great Hack on Netflix, it shows you how data mining and psychological manipulation did not only manipulate the election of Donald Trump, but excellently use social media to manipulate elections in my country, Nigeria, in Kenya and other African countries. Again, this only came to light because of the Brexit referendum and the US elections, but they had tested their cases on a couple of African countries, manipulating the election in favor of these companies. So you can tell that even when you think you have a right to get some of access to information, right to vote, there's an AI system manipulating what you think is the norm. But also there's the big one on right to privacy, and most people say, oh, privacy is dead. Michael Kosinski, who is the CEO of Microsoft Systems, says you have zero right to privacy, get over it. Elon Musk says privacy doesn't matter. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you as leading technologists is, does privacy still matter? And I'm sure people will say, well, it doesn't matter anymore. I live in Canada. I use a Presto card, a credit card, there are cameras all around. Of course, I don't have a right to privacy. But as a human rights lawyer, I would sort of kick against that. Because of surveillance capitalism, a lot of big tech companies want you to give up your privacy anyway so that they can benefit off your data. But the thing about privacy in law is that it's not just about your information or your pictures or your data, it's about your autonomy. Privacy is power, and when you relinquish every form of privacy that you have, you're actually giving part of your power to these companies to do whatever they can with it. So even though the narrative out there, even from very prominent people, is that privacy does not matter, it really does matter. Of course, I don't think of privacy in binary terms, in terms of whether you have it or not. I think of it like a pendulum that could shift based on your knowledge, based on the apps that you use, based on what country you live in, what security system you're under, your privacy might shift. But do not think that privacy in its entirety is irrelevant and shouldn't matter. Anyway, I just wanted to give that little snapshot there. Now let's look at the implication of AI for economic, social, and cultural rights. Ways that it has advanced economic, social, and cultural rights. One of them is advancing the right to healthcare. So today in China, there are robots. There are over 45 robots that take care of people who tested positive to the coronavirus, so that it would limit the amount of health officials that would be infected by the virus. So in China, over 3,000 health officials have gotten infected by taking care of people, but they've replaced some of them with robots who now do the case better. I think the healthcare is one of the sectors that AI has sort of really pushed economic, social, and cultural rights by designing treatment plans, mining medical records in various ways that humans would not have been able to. Another way is the right to education. AI has shown to excellently customize education programs, improving access to people who are living with disabilities or kids living with autism. So people even argue that robots are better in teaching language rights. And a couple of weeks ago, Germany just hired their first robot professor. Harvard is going to do the same. Of course, that poses a problem actually, but I'm just telling you that for some people who believe that, well, a robot can do it better, a robot is more patient, so it provides more opportunities. Another way is advancing the right to food and water, and this has made a lot of progress, especially within Africa, whereby AI can do things like precision farming, can personalize your nutrition, can help farmers tell what to plant, when to plant, and what kinds of yields they will get in terms of the demand in the market. But of course, AI comes with a lot of constraints to economic, social, and cultural rights. One of them is limiting the right to work. Automation is taking over jobs every single day. Every day, there is a new job that automation has wiped off. So displacing millions of workers. I remember there was a protest where, I can't remember where it was it in Italy or the US, where taxi drivers were like breaking the glass of self-driving cars because they felt this was limiting the jobs that they've been on for tens of years. AI has shown to also limit cultural rights, the non-recognition of indigenous traditions and cultural symbolism. So where construction companies are meant to follow certain rights, some rights, like cultural rights in how they carry out activities on land, robots don't know how to do that. So they don't recognize indigenous traditions or any cultural symbolisms, and it's almost difficult to ask a robot to recognize some of these cultural rights. Another very striking one is on the right to housing and social security. So the use of AI for welfare eligibility, like housing, loan, credits, has exhibited bias to socioeconomically disadvantaged people. Another example is a lot of people go to use things like 23andMe to check your genealogy, like your genetic makeup. But when you look at the terms and conditions, I mean, we lawyers, that's our job. When you look through and you're giving these companies the ability to sell your data to companies, and insurance companies really want that data because an insurance company wants to know if you're likely to have diabetes, high blood pressure, and that is all in your genetic makeup, and so therefore that would inform what your insurance premiums would look like. Not many people understand this, but that's the market. It might look like, oh, it's just $5, it's just $10, but this is where it comes from. Now, the danger here is that when I get your genetic data, I don't need to get that of your spouse, your kids, your brothers, because it might be along the same line. That's why insurance companies are really big on this. And this would inform whether or not you'll be insured and with what premium attached to that. So, another question I was going to ask was I think we're going to get to this point when health insurance plans will ask you to choose between a physical physician, a human physician, or an AI doctor. But yeah, I would look forward to hearing your views on that. So right now, let's look at the implication of AI on human rights in Africa. Of course, like I've said, there are several ways that AI promotes human rights within Africa, but in my opinion, there's like a lot more damage than otherwise for now. Just a little snapshot on Africa: 54 countries, 1.3 billion people. The average population is the youngest in the world. Occupies 20% of global land area. Lots of human rights issues. Political instability. We're still dealing with post-colonialism. Monopoly of civil and political power. Border conflicts and whatnot. Economic, social, and cultural rights are still, for some countries, a dream. But the continent is advancing in various ways than one, but the continent is unique in that it's witnessing the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolution at the same time. So you have communities that have never seen electricity before at all, and you have other communities within the continent that have robots. So you keep hearing things like Africa needs to leapfrog, but no one is talking about how does a community with no electricity get to jump into quantum computing and nanotechnology. So I'll just cite a few examples. One of the ways that AI has impacted or affects human rights in Africa is on security and the right to development. And I'll give you 3 examples. Now, the first thing I say is AI widens the technological gap between Africans and other parts of the world. So Africans must leapfrog or risk getting left behind. But under international humanitarian law is a subset of human rights law. It looks at the laws of wars and armed conflict. There are certain laws as to how you should treat prisoners of war, how women and children who surrender during conflict should be treated, do not harm health officials who are working on during war times and whatnot. So we call them the Geneva Conventions and its additional protocols. Now, there are 7 countries who have what we call lethal autonomous weapons, which means robots and AI systems that will go into the field and kill massively. Therefore, it's not human beings anymore that need to go to the field, they're actually robots. But these robots, or these lethal autonomous weapons or robots, are going to be problematic. First of all, no African state has any of this. All of these states are in the global north. And the conversation within the UN is to regulate these lethal autonomous weapons. You cannot have an AI system that will kill 1 million people in 10 minutes and think that is normal. Not only is there no progress on regulating this technology, the technology has actually failed. So in South Africa, where they had a lethal autonomous system, it turned around and killed its officers. So, the fact that this is a growing technology that is not regulated, more importantly, it's not a perfect system, shows to be problematic, especially where you have algorithms that would encode Africans as gorillas. So you might not see them as human beings, and you might just see them as animals, and we don't know what the implication would be. But there's also a risk of digital colonization, forced tech acquisition, and illegal data mining. So you have people like Mark Zuckerberg who take a trip to African countries, like, yeah, I want to give you free internet. That is the proposal. Facebook lures Africa with free internet. That's an article from The Guardian saying, but what is the hidden cost? Behind the hidden cost, the big question I always ask is when you go and you see levels of underdevelopment, you see roads have to be built, schools have to be built, how do you think people are going to access the free internet? Are they going to access it on their palms? Or like what like it's a good offer, but of course it comes with a hidden cost. They just want to grab data, they want to mine data. That's the interest, it's not really in development. So the real causes for how to develop the continent has been shifted. It's no longer about how do we eliminate disease, how do we promote education and healthcare. It's about how do we give them these resources about getting free internet for the benefits of the tech companies and whatnot. So this impedes security and development on the continent. But more importantly, AI has robbed a lot of Africans their jobs. So 600,000 workers in the last 5 years have no jobs because their job have been replaced by speed factories and smart factories in Germany and the US. So people who work in industrial or factory floors have lost their jobs, over 600,000. In fact, there's a documentary on this whereby a whole company shut down because there are robots that can do it better, faster. And you know that the continent, having a very young, agile population, needs some of these jobs to survive. Another thing that I see very clearly is the fear, and I have this argument a lot with my friends, that a lot of Africans feel that robots are getting more rights than them. And I try to exemplify this. Number one is, a robot was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia. Now, for the past 25 years, there have been thousands of workers, African migrant workers who work in Saudi Arabia, who don't have access to even a residency permit, not to talk of a citizenship. That's far-fetched. So there's been huge calls for Saudi Arabia to recognize give some of these African migrant workers some form of legal recognition, but none has been granted. But an AI system called Sophia was granted citizenship, right? The same thing with an AI system in Germany that was able to obtain a German passport and also board a flight. Yet there are more Africans who are limited by harsh immigration policies today. You know, the immigration systems are really harsh, but AI systems seem to be getting these privileges that regular human beings can't get. Also strikingly is sex robots in Japan that have a lot more protection than African migrant workers there. So a lot of Japanese companies use African migrants to work there, but these workers have no form of protection in the law. But if you read the laws that talk about how robots are protected, I think it's more voluminous than the one that recognizes, you know, human beings. So there's this almost like the pursuit of rights for African migrants in other countries seems to be hindered by this fascination of how robots should be and whatnot, to the fact that even in Japan, they have a robot that they actually worship. So you can imagine the elevation of such a thing in such a place. And more importantly, the fourth example I would give is how AI is making it easier for governments in Africa to target minority populations such as LGBTQI people. Already in Egypt, the police go on dating apps in guise of they disguise and trying to look like they're trying to hook up, but then they find people who are queer and then they arrest them. But now there are AI that could predict a person's sexual orientation simply by looking at their faces. And Huawei, IBM, ZTE are aggressively selling these AI technologies to African states that are very repressive and homophobic. My country, Nigeria, is one of the countries whereby a person could face death penalty on the discovery of them being gay. So a few other African countries and other countries as well. So as to what these African states would use this technology to achieve, no one knows, but these are some of the threats that AI is bringing for minority groups within the continent. So, where do we go from here? People say, what do we do? How do we solve this issue? The big question has always been who should be held responsible when AI violates human rights? And I always say that even though the law is not perfect, there is a duty of the state to protect its citizens when there are violations from AI. There's also the duty of tech companies. So people who create algorithms, or you're developing a new app or a startup, there's a responsibility for whatever you're creating to respect human rights and not infringe on them. But there's also a duty to fulfill or to provide remedy for human rights abuses through the use of AI. So I have a few suggestions, and my intent was to open it up to the class to find out what you think. How do we think AI can respect human rights? One, I think through human rights impact assessment for AI systems would be very helpful. I think the ethical debate on AI has been very resounding, that AI needs to be transparent, accountable, explainable, and whatnot. But I think beyond the ethical concerns, we need to have things like human-in-the-loop installations for autonomous or lethal autonomous AI. So when a robot is created to just kill people autonomously, there should be regulations as to having a human in the loop, meaning that there should be an opportunity for a human being to be able to stop it if it goes rogue, or take responsibility for that particular technology. I also think that we need to install privacy by design and not by demand. So when AI systems are being used, privacy should be the status quo. And if a person does not want to have privacy, then they can click the button the other way around. But tech companies do it the complete opposite. I also think we need to recognize the right to be forgotten. This is a new trend within human rights activism, recognized by the EU and also Argentina and a couple of other countries, that you have a right to be forgotten, in the sense that if there is something negative about you that is already out there in the internet, or let's say as a kid they used a picture of you in some way or form, you have a right to tell tech companies to delete that data permanently. The reason why this is important is because if I apply for a job and there's some negative information about me, when an AI system is going to do its background check, it would take that information into consideration, and that would affect my probability of getting the job or otherwise. There's a huge conversation around rights to be forgotten here in Canada, and it's good to follow up with that. We also need an international normative framework for artificial intelligence, some way to provide regulatory oversight as well, and legal remedy for where AI violates the rights of individuals. So these are some of my suggestions. I was looking forward to finding what your suggestions would be on ways that AI can respect human rights. So this is my little piece of a conversation around artificial intelligence and its impact on human rights, not only around the world, but specifically, like I've mentioned and shown you, some of the issues that Africans are quite concerned about in terms of the use of AI. Thank you once again for the opportunity to have this lecture. I'm really, really excited about being here, and I look forward to engaging with the class online if possible. I would also leave my contact details with Professor Thomas McMorrow. If you have any questions, anything you agree with or don't agree with, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you once again, Tom, for this unique opportunity. I'm very, very grateful.